Hey everybody, welcome back to Giant Talk, the world's first OKR podcast. I'm Lawrence, COO at There Be Giants, and I used to actually be host of Giant Talk 2 or 3 seasons ago, so there's about 20 or 30 episodes out there with my voice on, so you may recognise me from that. I'm delighted to be back today just guest hosting for this podcast, because today we have our own head giant, Roger Longden, joining us. And we also have, sorry, Roger.
Sorry, hello there.
And we also have the CEO of Ally, Vetri Vellore, joining us. Hi, Vetri.
Hi.
Great to have you both here. Really looking forward to this episode. Today, we're going to be talking about how changing environments are impacting productivity and prioritization within the workplace. Something that I'm sure is very relevant to all the listeners out there, and quite apt for the timing where we are, September. A lot of people are starting to think about this now, thinking about hybrid and remote working and the way it can interplay with OKRs and productivity more generally. So that's what we're going to dig into in a little while. But first, I'd just love it if you could introduce yourselves. So Roger, if you wouldn't mind doing a short introduction.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for frequent listeners to the podcast, they'll know my dulcet tones because I do pop up now and again. But I'm the founder of There Be Giants. The business started over 11 years ago as a performance consultancy, and we evolved into focusing in particular on OKRs about 6 years ago, which makes us one of the early movers, you might say, in this field. And since then, we've done work with some really exciting clients all around the world in multiple different sectors, ranging from broadcast media through to technology, through to power companies and so on. It's a real mixed bag. Really pleased to be here today to be talking about, obviously, the implications of what's happened over the past 12 to 18 months and how that's having an impact upon not just OKRs, but also the wider, like you say, the wider issues of productivity and so on. So, yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
Well, thanks, Roger. And Vetri, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself to the listeners.
Thanks, Lawrence. I'm Vetri Vellore. I'm the founder CEO of Ally. Ally is software solution that is essentially trying to bring purpose and productivity to work. So every one of us understands how we are tied to this bigger picture. We are not just laying bricks, but we kind of are building the cathedral. And how do we manage to stay focused on that key things, those key priorities? And OKR is a framework that we latched onto pretty early to support this mission. Ally solution is now used by about 1,000 organizations in about 80 different countries, organizations all the way from cutting-edge technology firms like Coinbase and Slack to traditional large enterprises like American Family Insurance and Financial Times and others. It's been an amazing journey for us to be able to work with so many organizations and help them become successful in the OKR journey, oftentimes working with key partners like There Be Giants. My own personal background, before Ally, I did another startup, which is really where I got exposed to OKRs. And I kind of realized the real power of OKRs, the simplicity and the immense power at the same time. And before that, I was running large product teams at Microsoft. I live in Seattle with my family.
Excellent. Thank you both for those introductions. Really interesting to hear the backgrounds of both yourselves and the organizations that we're representing today in There Be Giants and Ally. So let's jump into the core of the topic then, really. Setting the scene, one thing that I think we can all agree on in business that's an ever constant is change. Maybe not quite to the scale that we've seen over the last 12 to 18 months. I'm not sure anybody would have predicted that 2 years ago. But Roger, in your opinion, how have those events of the last 12 to 18 months really affected how businesses are responding to change?
Well, it's the events of the past 12 to 18 months have really hammered home that agility, adaptability, responsiveness, call it what you want, is absolutely critical for organizations nowadays. So I think it was always the case that change should not just happen. It should be managed. It should be led. It should be well communicated, and people should feel like they're part of it rather than that it's being done to them. That's always been, good practice around change management for many, many years. But what the sudden and rather turbulent changes of the past sort of 12 to 18 months have really hammered home is that organizations haven't got the luxury of having, a long time to plan and get people on side and so on and so forth. So the priority then becomes upskilling and also as well creating the mindset within individuals across the organization of one of we're constantly ready to adapt and change to changing circumstances, and that we can do that pretty swiftly. And we see that in our work with OKRs, because we see that they're starting to be used far more for cross-functional working, trying to align activity in relation to or in support of organizational priorities. It doesn't always neatly fit into functional teams and functional boxes. You have to start creating teams from other parts of pull from all parts of the organization. And so the bottom line is that, we've seen people and organizations put organizational agility much higher up the agenda. And I was doing a bit of reading around this, because that's obviously what we've observed from our clients and our projects, but also looking out there at the research, in terms of where it was on the agenda for senior executives globally. This is data from the CIPD here in the UK. They were saying that pre-pandemic, it was 40% of organizations had it on the agenda. And that was in a report that they published right at the end of 2019, just before the pandemic was upon us. And I think, from, like I said, from the sudden shock of last year, I think it's quite safe to say that it's probably even higher if they were to run that research again.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's interesting to see that. 40% probably sounds low now, actually, given everything we've been through. So it'll be fascinating for when they redo that research to see what that figure rises to. Vetri, have you seen similar with the businesses that you've been working with at Ally?
Certainly, Lawrence. There's a massive shift that has happened in the last year plus now, right? We see three big things along the lines of what Roger was talking about. One is the significant disruption to pretty much every business, right? I'm not talking about people yet, just the business, the supply chains, and everything has gotten rejiggered. And the need for business agility has become even more important, right? And it's always been there, just that it become more urgent now. And the focus from the business we work with on agility, how do they manage change quickly and effectively, has become really, really top of mind for folks. The second thing we have noticed is the notion of how do you think about remote work? How do you keep your team focused, productive, and engaged during this remote time when you cannot see each other in the office and have those quick conversations? How do you still bring clear focus and purpose to everyone when they're sitting at home? That's been a huge shift. That is a trend, to be honest, we have been seeing for some time. I think the pandemic has accelerated the trend and made it a lot more important and urgent as well. And the last one is at the individual level, right? The social isolation the pandemic has brought, and the thought process in enterprises around employee engagement and wellness. That has also increased in mindshare significantly. It's been hard on all of us to have social isolation for this really long, extended period of time. And the focus on definitely engagement and wellness is much higher now.
Yeah, I can completely echo that. I've seen measures which perhaps were previously, within just HR or were perhaps even in some organizations only given lip service, like you say, engagement measures and so on and so forth, become far more important to organizations. They're now appearing on the corporate dashboards, whereas perhaps they weren't given that level of visibility and priority in organizations. So definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm struggling to think of a client that I've worked with over the past 12 months that hasn't had a company OKR around employee engagement and remote working, to be honest. Yeah. So that is a massive shift. And it was interesting what you were saying about significant disruption to businesses as well, Ally. I was working with a client this morning, actually, who are really struggling with that. Massive levels of disruption to the supply of materials. They're a materials company. The one good thing that they did say that the OKRs had brought them was that they could deal with it, within a quarter, whereas before it might have taken them 12 or 18 months to deal with, just because of how many competing priorities there were. Yeah. There wasn't that focus and clarity on the disruption like there was when OKRs put it at the front and center.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the thing is, what I'm seeing in organizations is that they're kind of engineering themselves to be ready for what comes next. Or certainly the ones that are on the ball are doing that. And that doesn't mean to say that we do away with processes. Some might think that processes are the enemy of agility, but what you need are, and I think you've just given a good example of it there, what you need are processes that are adaptable, not brittle. And what you've just described there is an organization that is currently grappling with a challenge, but because they have the framework of OKRs through which to work through that challenge, they have an adaptable framework, they have an adaptable approach there which they can work with. Yeah, rather than a very clear mandated process which one needs to follow.
That's a great point, Roger. Just piggybacking on that one, Lawrence, because Roger made a very good point, in my opinion. The idea is also about how do you change your systems so they are very adaptable, right? And part of it is also decentralizing. How do you actually make the information, the OKR transparency really helps, because everyone in the knows where the bottlenecks are and where the issues might be. And it pulls in the entire organization, not just the people at the top, to actually think about it, and helps them react to these changes, gives them the right information, helps them react to changes much more quickly than before. We have seen that work within Ally too. We've always been OKR users, but as the pace of disruption has increased so much in the last few quarters, it's amazing to see how the information with the team helps us to move faster, decentralized decision making, and help to move even faster and adapt more quickly.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like, a really great way for businesses to prepare for these workplace changes that are going to affect everybody, as we come out of the pandemic, by being adaptable, by being malleable. But how can they maintain a strong vision and direction whilst also having that agility and flexibility, Roger?
So, sort of building on that observation that I made about that client that you said you'd been working with, I think having a goal management framework that really values collaboration and adaptability. So, I think the practice of goal management in organizations is a relatively new one. When I say goal management, I mean not the traditional cascade of goals through an organization. I mean the actual conscious mobilization of resources and bringing the right people together to work on what needs to be focused on to move the goals forward, and also then track it on a regular basis. But it's about creating the time and the space and giving the resources to those that are required to contribute to really work on that. to really genuinely work on that and it not be something that's paid lip service, something that is, like I said, a cascade, but just by another name. I think that's massively important. And what we're seeing as part of that is this is another route into OKRs, or maybe even organizations using the same approach but not calling it OKRs, is this desire to be focused on the finishing line, the outcome, rather than the output. I think there's this is one of the biggest shifts which I'm seeing in management for the past couple of decades, to be perfectly honest. It's always been there in pockets, in elements, in certain practices like project management and program management. But I think in just general management, being clear, leaders being clear about, well, this is where we want you to get to, but then not being prescriptive about how you should get there. And that is where you open up far more for the empowerment and the innovation, in fact, because it allows ideas to percolate through on new things that can be tested. So some might call it a product-orientated approach, because again, it's outcome orientation is something you often find in product teams. But definitely this shift from output to outcome is a significant shift, and it's obviously a cornerstone of working with OKRs as well.
So I think what I'm hearing there then is also, alongside that, providing true autonomy to the staff.
Massively.
Is autonomy something you've seen be powerful, Vetri, in the businesses you've worked with?
Absolutely, Lawrence. It does require a cultural change for some of the enterprises we work with, but it is a necessary and timely change. When I was using the word decentralized before, that is kind of related to autonomy, right? Fundamental need is to actually have autonomy, right? And tapping into that is hugely powerful. An OKR framework kind of blends beautifully into that, right? How you bring purpose through alignment, so as an employee or as a team why your work matters. But at the same time, you are not told exactly what to do, right? You've been given the purpose and it's left to you to figure out how do you manage to go about and accomplish that? And how do you align the resources and creativity to go make it happen? It's something it's not new. Again, it's been happening for some time, but it's become just a lot more important given the previous things we talked about: disruption, remote work, and employee engagement. We see that very, very consistently. It happens at different levels in different organizations, but it's a very strong trend we are seeing across all our customers.
That's really interesting. And obviously we start to touch on OKRs there. And, I think from both businesses, we've seen that OKRs are becoming a very popular choice for companies during this pandemic to create alignment within their organization. And the research that's coming back to us even suggests that 60% of OKR users adopted the methodology in the first place to create that alignment through their organization. There will be people listening to this who haven't started on their OKR journey yet. They're looking to implement OKRs maybe in the coming quarter or the coming financial year. Vetri, could you start us off on, a bit of advice that you might give those organizations on where to start with the process?
Sure, Lawrence. A vast majority of the customers we work with are in this bucket, relatively new to OKRs. And what we suggest is to actually start small, right? OKR as a framework is very, very simple, right? It's 5 core principles. But what's really happening in your organization is a transformation, as Roger mentioned. And change is not easy. Particularly change at this level is not easy. So what we recommend is starting small, typically at the senior most level in the organization, but bringing visibility to everyone else. it's like the rest of the team or organization is not yet doing OKRs, but let's say the top 2-3 levels of the organization has started defining OKRs for the business and the departments. Everyone still has visibility into what those OKRs are, how they are coming along, and you start building the trust, the transparency, and you start getting some of the benefits throughout the organization right away. But we think it's really important to start small rather than just go throughout the entire organization in one shot. Mm-hmm. The second thing we recommend to our customers is, particularly if you're new, working with actually a strong coach. This is just typical in any activity in life. If I'm learning to ski, I typically find a trainer or a coach. Right? This is a new activity. Having a coach, a lot of our customers also go learn on their own. That also has worked. But definitely what we have seen is having a coach helps to accelerate the journey and make sure you're getting off the right way in the OKR journey. The third thing we actually recommend is be patient, right? This is a transformation, and it typically takes what we call as 2 cranks, right? 2 OKR cycles, 2 quarters, if that's quarterly is how your organization is doing its rhythms. Be patient. It's going to work. It has worked pretty much with every client we have worked with, but it is a change at this deep level, meaningful level is going to take some time. You will start seeing immediate results, but you got to be patient to see the full results. And it might take 2-3 quarters. It works, but please be patient, set the expectations accordingly, and continue to make progress month after month.
Yeah. Brilliant. Roger, I got a feeling I know the answer to this question, but do you agree with Vetri there?
You know me too well. Yes, absolutely. Pilots are what we really, really advocate. Test it out, much in the same philosophy as OKRs themselves. Apply it to the way that you're going to use OKRs. Test it out, trial it. That kind of framing it as a test kind of takes the pressure out of getting it right first time, because the idea of a test is you test something out and you learn from it and then you adapt as a result of that. And that's one of the cornerstones of OKR best practice, full stop. So apply it to the way that you're going to use OKRs. It's as simple as that. If we can, I'd just like to just take a moment to share a story of a client that we worked with over the past 12 months that took this approach. And they had a division, a commercial division. It's a very large broadband provider here in the UK. And they had a division which was in need of some strong alignment, and they were experiencing silos when trying to work with other parts of the business. There was a lot of them and us going on. And they wanted to find a way that they could build some common shared objectives that people could really come together, and coalesce around. And so we helped them put some OKRs in place for their commercial division, which because they wanted to use them to drive cross-functional working, actually meant that they were inviting people from outside commercial to come in and work on the objectives. Like I said, use them as shared objectives. The interesting thing was that after setting that up around sort of June time last year, by the end of the year, they decided they wanted to deploy OKRs for each of their 6 strategic priorities, which were to get rolling from April this year. So we spent the first 3 months of this year helping them get OKRs in place for what were very cross-functional applications. So they tested it out, they learned from it, and as a result of that, and the wider business saw the value, because it's fair to say the wider business was quite skeptical about it at first. And that's another really important advantage of a pilot. You can leverage a pilot to, get some good news out there, show some really good results as a result from it. And we've seen the energy around pilots turn from, this is OKRs are something the rest of the organization needs to do to becoming right. When are we going to get them? When are we going to start with them? So yeah, it was a really powerful way of sort of starting small, leveraging that, learning from it, building it up to a point where they've deployed it on a very, very successful basis.
Yeah, that's great. That's just a fantastic example of Vetri's number one point there about starting small.
Yeah.
What about Vetri's second point, Roger, of working with a strong coach? Do you know any?
No, I can't think of any at the moment. If I do.
We're not bad. So here's an interesting stat for you both. 61.5%, very specific in this stat, 61.5% of people who have used a goal framework in the past have reported back that they're worried about hitting their goals or not hitting their goals, but having those goals creates some sort of worry. Turning to you, Vetri, with the OKR framework, what reassurance can you give to people that might have those worries that OKRs are slightly different?
Wow, great question, Lawrence. I'm going to take this in two different directions. The first one is OKR framework, if anything, emphasizes learning. It is really not about did you get to this goal exactly as it was planned, right? It is really about how do you learn, how do you stretch? And in fact, in most cases, you're not expected to hit the goal, right? The goal might be to reach 100 million in revenue, and you still celebrate success when you get to 70, 80% of it. Right? I think that comfort and the focus on learning about OKRs makes this process a lot more manageable while still helping people to stretch and aim for bigger things. The second direction in which I want to take this is philosophically, when you're running an organization, it is in fact okay to be uncomfortable. In fact, most learning happens in that zone. When you're in a comfort zone, very little learning happens. When you're in the zone after that, the learning zone, as I call it, you will be somewhat uncomfortable. But you have to be, that's where your individuals in your team grow, the organization grows, and it's a good thing. And that's one of the things I really like about the OKR framework. Yeah. In most cases, the objectives are set up as stretch objectives, deliberately taking the organization into this slightly uncomfortable zone where learning is maximized.
Yeah, massively. If you're constantly hitting 100%, the tendency is just to continue and coast by. There's no real motivation to actually look at how things could improve. Some might actually say, well, how could we do even better than 100%? But that's the minority. But if you're not quite getting there, then yeah, like you say, Vetri, that's where the learning takes place. That's where the growth takes place.
Yeah, absolutely. Roger, I'm wondering though if you have any advice on those who are maybe setting up the OKR framework about how to balance the management of goals with the management of culture in terms of hitting them. We've seen with a lot of our clients in the past that there has been this immediate worry when OKRs are first implemented in the organization. Yeah, that they have to hit every goal. And how somebody might take that on board.
Yeah, it very much depends on how goals have been managed, goals have been approached in the past. And if the message has been hit 100% or you lose your job, then all of a sudden a message saying, hey, it's okay for you to fall short on these can be quite unsettling and quite detrimental for performance, actually. So there's no one size fits all in terms of this approach. You have to be guided by how things have worked in the past. But what I would say is, as a rough rule of thumb, is that it's a good idea to work with probably more committed key results in the first cycle or couple of cycles, just to get everybody up to speed and feel comfortable with the way of working with OKRs. And then once people are confident with the way of working with OKRs, start to introduce a degree of stretch. So you start to introduce some aspirational ones. And we do differentiate between the key results when we work with clients, because even though all the books and blogs and so on and so forth out there say that key results should all be aspirational, well, actually, in practical terms, out there in the real world, there are certain things which absolutely have to be delivered 100%, and there's just no no falling short will mean 100% failure. But as you progress through and become more confident with OKRs, I would expect the share of committeds to decline and the share of aspirationals to increase.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. So Vetri mentioned earlier, actually, OKR implementation is a transformational activity that requires a focus on change management. That was one of the key reasons Vetri advised starting small in the first place. And as we know, Roger, there's a huge link between OKRs and culture, company culture.
Yeah.
We've brought in valuable expertise into Derby Giants to make sure we're always nailing that for our clients.
Yeah.
Really what I'm interested in, though, is how you can focus on fostering a culture that really emphasizes employee experience. I mean, it's vital to reduce employee churn for a start, so it's important businesses do that. But at the same time, maximize the results needed to be able to drive businesses forward to where they want to be. Vetri, if I can come to you first on that question.
Sure, Lawrence. There are a couple of aspects here. One is, it should not be seen as an initiative, ideally just push from the top, right? I think the job of the leadership here is to actually emphasize why the employee experience is going to improve as a result of using OKRs, and also explain how it's connected to the company's culture. Take, for example, Ally, our values are around being data-driven instead of being personality-driven. Our values are around being transparent by default, right? Everything is visible to everyone. So leadership needs to actually take the time to actually help people understand the connection between OKRs and the culture of the organization and how they seamlessly fit in. I think it's a communication challenge, and make sure that your team understands it is not yet another top-down initiative to just run the business better and generate more profits, but it's really about really connecting to the employee experience and the culture of the organization. That communication is really, really important. Otherwise, it sets the stage wrong. Too many companies we have worked with, there is a new initiative every year, right? You don't want this to fall in that bucket. This is a transformative initiative. It is going to determine the long-term success of the company bigger than most other initiatives. Putting that emphasis and connecting the dots from the initiative to just not business outcomes, but employee experience and culture is a leadership challenge. It's not hard to do, but something they have to be cognizant of and make sure that's included when they actually roll this out. The second is, how do you get people to own this, right? Again, the OKRs OKR fits in very naturally here as well. The whole idea of OKRs is not just it cascades from top to bottom, but it actually can go from bottom to top as well. In fact, the best companies we work with do both really, really well. About 60% of objectives come from the top and 40% come from bottom up in a typical case that we work with. So how do you get people to own this, right? This is their initiative. It's not something that it's for their benefit. And how do you get people to own this rather than just look at this as a system that's coming down from the top? If we can do that communication, and if we can get people to understand and own it, we have seen those programs seamlessly fit in, OKRs and employee experience and culture seamlessly fit in and become amazingly successful.
Yeah.
Is it similar?
Yeah, well, just to build on Vetri's point there and link it back to something that I mentioned earlier about this paradigm shift that we're seeing in wider, more general sort of management now to a more outcome-based approach to management. That fits in with exactly what Vetri was just saying there, because if you're managing by outcomes, by its very nature, you're being less prescriptive. And I think that I think the challenge for leadership nowadays is there is so much noise out there. There are so many things that could distract, even more so from the past 12 to 18 months, that could distract and pull us off course. From the macro level of the alerts on our phones to the micro level to the macro level of what's going on in world economies and so on. There's so many things that can pull us off track. So leadership's job is to separate the noise from the signals and be really ultra clear on what those signals are, because those signals are the priorities. And the minute you're clearer on the priorities, then that by its own very nature, again, is also empowering, because people are clear about the direction that we're moving in and what the end point is, and therefore can make a decision in the moment, or certainly very timely, on what they do next, where they focus their time, where they spend their budget, because they know what the priorities are. They're not having to defer traditionally, I suppose, upwards to seek clarification or seek approval or sign off or so on. So the priorities are clear. And obviously what then comes with that is a degree of empowerment. So this is all about taking a far more human-centered approach to the development and execution of strategy. And as I mentioned before, particularly with the example, taking a cross-functional, far less hierarchical approach to the way that you deploy, or the way that you align through the business, people into your and teams into your priorities, is really key, is absolutely essential.
So I think what you've both done there is absolutely flipped my question on its head, and have really asked me how can I expect to maximize the results needed to drive my business forward if I don't foster a culture that emphasizes employee experience? Really is what we're getting at there, isn't it?
Oh,
yeah. Roger, I'm going to come to you first on this next question, if that's all right, because you kind of started to touch on this before, and you mentioned how we can use pilots and different parts of the business or projects or initiatives to start to build excitement and momentum for OKRs in an organization. But what I'm interested in here is what guidance you have for those that are trying to implement OKRs in their business and are seeing resistance to the process, first and foremost.
Yeah, so we've been called into a few clients who have been experiencing resistance. They've tried to do it for themselves. They didn't get their skiing instructor, Vetri. So there's a number of different reasons as to why you can see you can be experiencing resistance, but what it pretty much comes down to is the change just has not been managed. It hasn't been managed in the right way. And I'm thinking of one in particular where they decided to do to implement OKRs across all 3,000 people in one go, and then wondered why it fell flat. And they were going, hang on a second, we've got 3,000 people who are all trying to align into the CEO's OKRs. This just isn't working. So they hadn't. They'd been too eager to jump straight in, which I'm a big believer in many instances of just getting started. Throw yourself into it and learn from it. But in this instance, they burnt through a lot of goodwill in the organisation in doing it that way, and so when I went in and I worked with them to actually design a more beneficial and productive OKR implementation, they had to basically press rewind and say, okay, here comes OKRs version 2. And what they did was they went through they went through the process of laying the groundwork first. This is the vision for OKRs. This is why we need them. This is what will happen if we don't have them. So, making sure you've got a bit of carrot and stick there. And also, so importantly, this is what's in it for you. This is how it's going to make your job, or maybe even your life, a bit easier, a bit better. This is the value in it, right? And that is something which, to say it here and now, sounds completely blindingly obvious. Why on earth would we not do that? But, you know, like I said, this was an organization, a very well established software organization that just went, right, we're doing it, 3,000 people, there you go, bang. And it just fell flat. So, you know, even really experienced organizations can sometimes still slip up on this.
Vetri, have you seen similar in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, very, very similar experiences. I think we talked about starting small and showing traction, right? But the showing traction, again, it's okay, right? Even if a small team in the organization is doing OKRs, we typically prefer that being the leadership team. And then everyone in the company having access to the fact that they are doing it. Here are the OKRs, here's the progress. And that actually builds a lot of excitement, right? You're not burdening everyone in the organization at the same time to figure out what are OKRs, how to write great OKRs. And people learn when the leadership models, right? The leadership is modeling their usage of OKRs, and that's one of the best ways to create excitement and that momentum. In fact, we often see some other departments and teams will immediately jump and say, we also want to do this. Now that we have seen how our leadership does it and why it is good for the organization. The other thing is making sure that you're not creating extra work for your teams and users, right? Everyone is already busy. And how do you make sure that this OKR is actually net positive and it's not just one more thing that they need to do every week, every month, every quarter? And there are a couple of things. One is consciously thinking about what is it you're replacing? Okay, you added this thing, OKR. What is it replacing? How does your weekly status thing become not necessary anymore? Right? Are you going to do an OKR review and a weekly status, for example? Right? What are the things you want to now remove or reduce? So this is not a net addition to work that your team has to do every day, every week. The second part is, how do you also use tools like Ally and there are others, right, to automate a lot of these? So you're not burdening your team with a lot of manual work and updating OKRs and stuff. For example, tools like Ally allow you to easily connect the objective or the KPIs to where work happens, like to Salesforce or to Jira, so many other places, project management, other systems, BI systems your team may be using, and automatically update the objectives. So you eliminate that one more thing that your team now has to do, but you retain the benefit that OKR brings without all the extra effort you need to put into it. We recommend that people look into reducing the effort and also starting small and showing traction.
Yeah, no, they're all really important points, and I thank you for those. Just to pick up and advance on something that Roger said about always making clear, you know, you're answering that question, what's in it for me or my team? At a senior level, I think one of the things that I've seen a lot when I've seen resistance at that level is that actually that resistance is just a manifestation of an anxiety or an apprehension of what the OKR implementation actually means. And I think it's really important, therefore, that it's outlined from the very beginning exactly what this OKR implementation means for the organization and for those people at that level. You know, what it's going to look like, what it's going to include. Because in almost every instance when I've seen resistance, once those questions have started to be answered, the resistance fades quite quickly.
Yes, 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 100%.
Right. I think I've allowed us all to, gabble on for long enough. So I'd like to wrap up with a closing question, and I'll come to Vetri first, which is, you know, we've covered a lot of topics today. We've gone through some tips for OKR implementation. If somebody's looking to implement OKRs right here, right now, once they come off listening to this podcast, what is the one next step they should take in order to start to lead a successful OKR implementation? Maybe specifically with regards to change management, as that's been the focus of today.
In my opinion, what we have seen some customers do is they research and research and research. OKR is fundamentally really simple and easy. Now, doing it at a scale and doing it through a proper change management, that's a different exercise. But it's a fundamentally very easy framework. I would always recommend, instead of being on the sidelines, take the plunge. Do it at small scale, but get started. Get started. Find a coach if you think you need one and get started. It is a very, very easy framework. And only by doing, your learning is going to accelerate on how to do it better and better. And then when you're at the right level, right expertise, you can scale it to other parts of your organization. But get started. It's easy. It's my biggest recommendation. There are two more I would say in the same vein. When you get started, it's not just about OKRs and how you roll it out to your leadership team, but you have to show why this is important at all levels of the enterprise, something we touched upon throughout this conversation. Why is it really important for the business to be agile? Why is it super important to help with the growth of the business? So at a business level, at a team level, why is this important? And at an individual level, why is their life going to be better? Why is this important for them? So we have to lead with why is this change important? Even though the change in some cases maybe the framework is easy, you still have to give context as a leader into why this is important at every level of the enterprise. And also set expectations that this is going to be a journey. This is not like we roll this thing out and next week we are done and we are experts and we are good to go. But set expectations on this is important, but this is going to be a journey. We're going to learn along the journey and get started.
Absolutely. And Roger, from yourself?
So everything Vetri just said, and I particularly like the point about just trying it out, just getting stuck in and trying it out in a small, controlled way. So on a practical, from a practical point of view, that could mean choosing a particular priority in your plan and developing some OKRs to support that, or it could mean just choosing a team, and marketing is often quite a good one to try it out in, because there's, as marketing runs nowadays, there's a hell of a lot of data around. So there's no shortage of measures or data you can use to create measures anyway. So, and they often have to be quite creative and they're often testing new things out. So, it's an interesting area to try. However, as you look to perhaps go that step further and start with the wider rollout, I would say for most organizations, this is where, don't just think about the training people or in the art of writing good OKRs and so on and so forth. That's important, yes, but that's just the starting point. Getting people comfortable with ambiguity is important, because if you're going to be giving them outcomes to work to, they have to be comfortable with not also being given instructions on how to get there. And for a lot of people, that can be really quite unsettling. Really quite unsettling. So, but the process that they go through is a really powerful one. As they work through that ambiguity, that's how alignment's built. That is how alignment is built. So, in terms of advice to organizations here and now, I'd say make sure you provide the space for teams to work through and build that alignment, because the outcome will be far more powerful than if you take the shortcut and just give them their objectives and key results, because they will have no buy-in to that, and there's no guarantee that that they would be the right ones in the first place. Okay.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, thank you both so much, Roger, Vetri, for joining me on today's podcast.
Welcome. It's been great.
How those changing
Thank you.
environments.
It was fun. It was a pleasure. Thanks, Lawrence. Thanks, Roger.
Absolutely. And thank you to the listeners, of course, for joining us for another episode. As always, any comments about the episode, any feedback, or anything at all you want to discuss, feel free to reach out to us at growth@therebygiants.com. In the show notes description, we've actually linked our joint ebook that we've written with Ally, which is all about 4 strategies for navigating organizational change with OKRs. So please do feel free to drop on and download that as well. That would be a really nice follow-up to this podcast that we've done today. But ultimately, we'll see you next time for another episode of Giant Talk. Thank you very much. Bye.